So, Ross, I would like to hand over now to you. So I just quickly gave the community here an overview of the API, what you can do, and how you probably can integrate it into your existing business application. What is the API? Which features does it provide? Shortly about the markup language which you provide. And now I would be happy to hear more about use cases. And
Oh, yeah, of course. And I appreciate the introduction and you preparing the presentation for community about OpenLaw. This was a much deeper technical dive than I'm used to seeing by community developers. So, very impressive. And I'm glad you're able to use the API to sort of, create legal documents using the OpenLaw protocol, but not even having to go to the OpenLaw website and, use those tools. We have the sense that, interoperability is the future, be more modular, not trying to have one company or, one protocol do all the things, but just be super useful, sort of base layer that most people can agree on. One of the things that, in terms of my background, how I found value in OpenLaw was I'm a lawyer trained in New York. I used to do a lot of corporate deal work. And for me, I saw a lot of inefficiency between what I saw as separate libraries of, deal documents and legal templates that never really got updated in sync. One law firm had their, private sort of sauce, for doing an M&A transaction, and they very fiercely protect that information. However, what we see with the internet, with Wikipedia, and kind of that trend of interoperability, everything's colliding, everything is enmeshed, legal information is no different. And there is a lot of efficiency, I think, that can be gained for lawyers that kind of put all the documents in one place and then figure out a way to sort of use it more meaningfully, not having one law firm sort of own the sense of corporate deal work, but saying, here is a master template. This will save everyone more time. And OpenLaw, as you described, provides a markup language. It provides an API to sort of allow law firms or any other business to sort of use what's happening in our library. And in that sense, ideally, as it grows and a critical mass of that legal information is in one place and it's easy to use because of the markup language and other tools, we see a bit more harmony. And ideally, the legal profession, extracts less value in terms of being corporate deal makers and contract drafters. So yeah, like I can say all this stuff. It's all kind of vague and I think on a grand scale, but, I always try to bring it down to earth in terms of my, legal practice. How can I, use legal terms without having to talk to a bunch of other lawyers and get their hot takes? Could I have a sort of Wikipedia, a GitHub for legal deal work? So that was kind of the grand, vision of OpenLaw and a lot of the, I guess, passion behind providing that technology and making it open source. There is a sort of common nexus of interest, I think, between lawyers and developers to just make it easier to figure out what the heck, what's market. Now I'd probably like to show a bit from my screen and give maybe a light demo of how I like to use OpenLaw and the markup language. So let me see if I can get that working. Okay. Oh, also you might notice that my screen says Lizzie. My name is Ross. Of course, I'm using my wife's computer at the moment because it has much better bandwidth and throughput. If I was using my computer, you probably wouldn't even be able to see my face because it'd be like, so I want to give a bit of a background note there. So I just bought some dye from Uniswap for preparation for this demo, so I'm going to get off there. I think you guys are already familiar with our sort of documentation of how to use OpenLaw. Very sophisticated people in this group, so I'm just going to steam ahead to sort of my demo. So, the big question is, OpenLaw is technology. It's also a library, a community resource. How do you even contribute? How do you use the stuff that's happening in OpenLaw? Obviously, we have a landing page that's descriptive, but, what's practical is going straight to the library. And I usually just try to share this link, lib.openlaw.io. As you can see, there's a bunch of different efforts and different experiments going on. And it's always the struggle for any, I guess, open source repo to rationalize contribution into usable chunks. But, creating a critical mass, I think, is the first goal. And I've been pleased to see a bunch of different people trying the markup and experimenting. You might notice when you join the library that there's a weird hat symbol. This is one of my favorite templates, and I think it does a good job of showing some of the power of the OpenLaw markup. You can create a sort of questionnaire to guide people through their use case, which might be in a lot of, what I do and people I'm involved with in the space, they're very keen on using Ethereum technology to represent assets such as tokens. You can tokenize your time as a lawyer, perhaps, and say if you have, 100 of my tokens, you get 100 hours of my time. And that allows, lawyers to maybe use Uniswap and other ways to price the value of their time. But, let's actually go through it. So using this markup, I'm able to take a client or a user through a choice with different legal wrappers representing a sort of way to frame that tokenization. I think, tokens don't solve the issue of, redemption or a value. They should actually mean something, either in terms of protocol rights, like I have a token, it's a bearer instrument, therefore I have a right to run software, or I have a right in a DAO that holds a pot of funds. However, where I think things get interesting for lawyers is, we create tons of rights every day just through signatures and people committing to some sort of future, goal or revenue stream. So, that's something that I just want to flag on the horizon. I don't think all lawyers and all businesses are going to tokenize this year, but I think they're going to be watching what crypto entrepreneurs do with weird things like personal tokens and actually come to the conclusion of, oh, this is just really fast, cheap settlement of trades. Who doesn't like that? Who doesn't see a use case for fast settlement of trades for, legal businesses? So kind of going through this, I can do a warranty for tokenized goods. I can say I'm going to issue an asset on Ethereum that is, public, verifiable, tradable, and it relates to this underlying OpenLaw agreement that I signed. So let's say goods or bowl of salsa. I can include a photo. I can do all these other things, and under the hood, this can look scary, I think, to some people, but to lawyers, I hope that a lot of the OpenLaw markup and system is familiar. The sense of, bracketing something to turn it into a variable. And also, there's simple ways to copy and paste calls to smart contracts. And I don't know if that's beyond the scope of this call and this demo, but our markup docs, I think, provide a pretty good way to get started in all this weird stuff I'm talking about. So we can see how this looks under the hood. More relevant for, I think, lawyers and coders than users. Redemption. Let me try to get through this. I'm going to sign the warranty. And by signing a warranty, I'm creating a legal liability. And that immediately has market value, right? So like a digital way to represent a liability is always pretty cool. Let me see if I can send this. Cool. And then one neat thing about OpenLaw is I think it provides a very swift system to go from filling out a form field, teeing up variables that populate a legal agreement, and actually getting to a e-signature state. As you saw, I put in some form fields, and then because I was a signatory, my email was included as one of those fields. I immediately get redirected to the contract execution screen, which I think is pretty convenient. I don't know if you guys have had to deal with chasing down clients and getting different people to sign off on something, or like collecting signatures. It's not easy. And I think it wastes a lot of time and allows lawyers to extract value that's really removed by technology. Sign, wonderful. All right. I don't know if I actually included Ethereum call in this example, but I know what I'll do. Because as a library, if I have a use case in mind, I can just like try to Google it, invoice. At any point in my rambling, let me know if you have questions, because like I tend to just like go off in space sometimes. This is a use case that I think is underrated for using OpenLaw markup and Ethereum technology, and it's basically just payments. Anyone who's worked as a contractor or done any sort of work of that regard knows that there's a gap of settlement between you putting in your invoice, it getting processed, and then a bank on the other end sending the payment to the contractor. This is even more difficult for, I think, international organizations and startups where you have a bunch of different banks that have, those assets, and they need to be reconciled, into the native currency of, that contractor, and it's a mess. But with Ethereum technology, such as stablecoins, which are able to at least provide a fixed sort of value relative to the US dollar, and a digital form of that value that can be instantly sent after an invoice is signed, I think we actually see some pretty legit gains in efficiency just by I don't know how long this thing is. It's probably like, it's like 100 lines of markup for this use case. That's not that bad. Let's try it out. So I'm going to copy and paste my MetaMask. And I'm going to serve both roles in this case. Usually there'd be, a different email address, people signing off on a request for an invoice. I'm going to be the same person, or better yet, I'm going to switch things up. I'm going to have this guy get paid die. Consulting services, or let's call it legal engineering demo or something, just for fun. The form fields allow, math. Like I could probably gush for a long time about, the stuff under the hood here, but, I can actually say I worked 1 hour, and then OpenLaw, kind of does the math and multiplies that by, how much I'm asking, price 10. I think I have 10 die. I can actually switch between digital currencies. So I could say, pay me in USDC because, my local government likes that sort of regulatory certainty better of, cash in the bank. But, like I said, DAI is just as good. Dated, details arranged through a form field. All of this is updatable and curated by a community. Anyone can say that's a bad term, or, I want additional digital currencies involved, and they can just add it. Just add a couple lines of OpenLaw markup and you're cooking with gas. Oh, this is actually interesting. So the OpenLaw markup can also enforce roles. A lot of what I see as the future of legal performance, executing milestones is like a form of digital performance, where it's like, okay, I did a thing, pay me. That's your legal obligation, is to simply make sure I get paid. And that used to contemplate talking to a bunch of different people and arranging actors to hopefully do the right thing and send money to the person's account. With digital dollars and OpenLaw markup, we can have the company actually remove bankers from the equation. And I know I'm rambling here. Here I designed it so that the company is the only one that can actually click this and do the performance of paying. That was really the point I was trying to make. Cool. So the markup has teed up my legal performance. I'm going to pay 10 DAI on this invoice, and then we're good to go. That's some e-commerce right there. Let me actually see how this goes down. Most of y'all are probably familiar with Etherscan, which is a so-called block explorer that allows you to track the state of Ethereum. A lot of that state is just sending tokens back and forth. Here, I have my company sending tokens, here DAI stablecoin, to the contractor as agreed and as signed. That's really just like a 0.1% use case of, I think, the potential of a law library that is real-time upgradable in terms of basic legal terms, wet code, and also the dry code of communities thinking about different smart contracts that can remove sort of difficulties with legal performance, remove bankers, remove other third parties, and they can just slap that into these agreements and offer that sort of use case, I think, pretty quickly compared to sort of getting other developers involved and having to get people who are sophisticated. What I hope to express and what the OpenLaw markup tries to achieve is to make legal writing and also, I guess, smart contract stuff very easy and approachable. Anyways, any questions about some of the stuff I've tried to show with, I guess, the OpenLaw markup, its malleability, the community angle here, what we're trying to do with Ethereum payments? Any questions from the community?
Ross, could you tell us something about where the, for example, the invoice now would be stored? I'm wondering, like, if you have a company, you have to somehow save your invoices, especially for 10 years for tax reasons.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah.
So a big part of law is record keeping, recording the intentions of people so they can point at each other and say, you're supposed to do this thing. And because you didn't do it, a judge is licensed to sanction you. In the OpenLaw case, we just send documents to the emails of the parties. So in that way, we're pushing doc storage responsibility onto the users. I think that's probably advantageous, though, than having OpenLaw or another company sort of maintain all those documents, given that we kind of see more of the future in peer-to-peer contracts. And, I hope that's helpful. But, it's not set in stone. It's not completely obvious if, law firms or other users would gladly pay for, that sort of server assistance and being a sort of maintainer of legal records. But I think a lot of the passion of the blockchain community and people who are building this kind of technology is to not have single points of failure like that. However, you could argue Gmail is a single point of failure, but it's maybe more robust. They own a lot of servers, and I guess they want to compete with Amazon or something. But is that helpful? It's good feedback to know if
yes, sure.
So
if we go away from the invoice, we go back to the contract now. If I have an email with the contract that says, well, I signed the contract, or the other party signed the contract, is there a way for me to, if I search up that email in an archive, is there a way for me to come back from this email to trace back to the point of, signing this contract? Is there a way to trace that back, or?
Yeah, so here we're using email and that login to sort of establish a user identity. We are agnostic to whether a robot or there's people pretending to be somebody else using those emails. So that's the first part, to sort of have enough of an ID to probably provide an enforceable e-signature. And then, I guess like what you're trying to ask is, what is the sort of way to reconstruct that signature? Is that the question?
Right.
Yeah, I guess it's really just purely the data that's in that e-signed PDF, or in some ways, actually here's something I should clarify. Even though OpenLaw doesn't have a nice curated list of all the docs, we technically do have this as a form of document storage. This should probably be showing that as executed, but here we have my e-signature. We have the connection of, I have a copy I can reference in my email against what OpenLaw is saying the executed document looks like. And that's probably somewhat efficient to that problem. There are ways easily to sort of store signature data from an OpenLaw document onto a smart contract. Each OpenLaw signed agreement actually has a hash that is derived from the user emails. And this is something that's more in David Rune's brain, who understands cryptographic signatures better. But each e-signed contract exists as a hash in our sort of database. The emails that actually are part of that hash can access it and look at it. Nobody else can. Create more fidelity and not have to rely on the OpenLaw hash, it does seem useful to pass some of that data, maybe an encrypted file storage on IPFS, or as a reference in a smart contract. But what we found, at least, is that users don't necessarily care as much about permanence in blockchain signatures as previously hoped. They do get really jazzed about e-signed and trigger a payment, or removing the banks from the equation. But I guess there's still some question of do we want to architect that first, for people? But yeah, that's helpful. What would make you feel better about the record of your signatures here? I guess that's helpful. Yeah.
I guess the way that you described it is it's totally sufficient for the majority of all contracts, but there might be some bigger M&A deals or whatever with the high price tag, where you want to make sure it's not just an email. There's some way to right. So it would be cool if there would be some kind of crypto magic where I could just take that email from my archive and through some sort of hash verify at all times that at this certain point in time these two parties agreed on that exact content of the email, right? On that. So
okay, yeah,
but it's definitely not for everyday business. That's
yeah. So as you can probably see, we're trying to attack several parts of the market. There is a market for very low deal value document automation that is almost just a public good, and is great to get out there and also get the feedback from people to curate the library. But, OpenLaw does have tools that are like more advanced that aren't, in production, that aren't public and free. And, basically they're being designed for law firms and their requirements. And the law firm says, we don't care about the email. We need your service here to create, a more fidelity for the signature or to push that to a smart contract. That will happen, totally. But I think that the challenge and the opportunity is to get people to at least understand, the markup language, the value of having a single library, like a GitHub for legal information, and also to allow people to sort of act and perform in a legally significant way, which right now looks a lot like signing financial transactions. And that's kind of the blockchain part. And that's something that's just really fun to watch happen in the wild and see what people come up with. But yeah, like with OpenLaw, there's ways to, not beyond payments, create organizations. As lawyers will know, an organization is just a set of contracts. And that analogy lends very well to the idea of smart contracts as well, which are really just, rules and obligations between accounts, but they're immutable in the sense of, there's not a lot of ways for states and other legal actors to change that information and the state of those contracts. So it's kind of an approach of private law maximalism in that sense. And I see that being the larger use case for this technology is building entire organizations entirely as code objects with law as like a special trimming to allow people to understand from the old world that have a way to sort of attack those organizations using legal sanctions to say, like, here's something you recognize, here's a legal form, here's a LLC operating agreement that represents the rules and permissions among LLC members, which are really just accounts signing transactions in a DAO. So yeah, there's a lot going on, suffice to say. Was there a question though? I'm not sure if I saw something in the chat.
Yes, Karin, willst du die Frage einfach nochmal selbst stellen oder soll ich es vorlesen?
Nee, ich glaube, vorgelesen ist es nicht so gut. Hello, Ross. Thanks for sharing your knowledge. Ross, my question is, let me see if I got it right. Yes, OpenLaw is here presented as something like a tool for digitize private contracting. Yes. But what's interesting to me is, do you also do what I've heard about OpenLaw before, that you try to write the law, but more generally as accessible, for example, also about legal laws you want to refer in your contracts. So is there something like discussion with administrations or something who are interested in having something like this? Because I'm pretty sure they should or would be interested in having something like a GitHub of law, yeah, where you can refer to and where you find all those legal decisions which you only want to refer, like, hilf mir mal, Jakob, bitte mit ein paar Übersetzungen von zum Beispiel allgemeinen Geschäftsbedingungen und so.
General terms and conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Things like that. Is there something planned or something like? No.
I guess I'm hopefully I understand the question. Are you asking about how administrations in terms of legislatures and other sort of super legal structures would use OpenLaw, or did you mean something else by administrations?
Yeah, are you going to also, if you want, code law for more legal stuff? It's already existing out there. You just want to refer to and then have the link to it. And this is also part of your GitHub of digitized contracts, or is this out of scope?
So I think I hope I understand, like, the idea of Ricardian contracts or hybrid representations of promises in code and human readable terms. To take a step back though, I actually think Solidity as a coding language is very readable, but going back, Yeah, that is something that's definitely within the scope of what OpenLaw is trying to build and energize. Is every commitment between a person or an entity can probably be reduced into core sort of decision trees or if-then statements that trigger the next stage of performance of the promise. But we see it as necessary to always have the backstop of parties' intentions, in a legal contract. But I don't know if I'm just saying the same thing I've been saying this whole time, or if I'm actually answering your question. But yeah, it's a large tent, and it's also an experiment in terms, at least from my point of view, of how essential is legal context anyway. So yeah, there's a sort of core that I guess I'm striving towards of like handshake agreements that actually have the complexity of an M&A deal, but have less cognitive load on users and the people that enter into these things than going to a law firm for 6 weeks or something, like there's clearly a better way. And I think code is sort of the tip of the spear to force those efficiency gains. I don't think lawyers will make legal products more efficient unless there is an existential threat. And the only threat that's possible I see is code and immutable ledgers where lawyers through their arms in legislatures and in governments cannot unfairly tip the balance of this game, So yeah, I don't know. Anyways, I'm kind of rambling, but any other questions?
Okay.
Jakob, this is leading to a little bit different behavior in law in Europe or America, is it? Or isn't there any difference in this way? Because we have this more
I think
general law, don't know.
Yeah, American law is very complex because our nation was formed and forged out of a unwary alliance among different governments. Of course, every country has its own sort of complicated history about how it comes to distributing powers and checks and balances. But yeah, American law and the practice is, I feel, very local in the sense that, we're a common law system. A lot of what we advise clients on is derived from, judge cases, sort of our local district. And there's a lot less direction that I see from the Supreme Court and higher order legal bodies, that they very rarely set a direction. And then it's like law goes in hyperspeed between all these different states that are experimenting. And then sometimes there's challenges and sometimes it gets consolidated at the federal level. But I do think the American legal system, and also kind of why it's so hard to become an American lawyer, is you have to sort of study and become part of a local network. There is still rivalry between, New York and Florida, where, New York is embracing the uniform, bar exam, where we're saying, maybe, people who go to law school in New York might want to practice in Massachusetts. What a crazy idea. Maybe we should make it easier for somebody who passes the New York bar to be able to practice in a different state and serve clients elsewhere. But there's certain states like California and Florida that say, nope, we don't want any part of that. If you want to practice law and have influence on Californian law, you basically have to take their exam, which really necessitates like a year or two of vetting. So I don't know if that's necessarily the case in Germany or in a lot of other jurisdictions where you have a lot of fragmentation that gets resolved through dispute resolution. Yeah. So, anyways,
maybe Karin, what you were trying to get at with your question was maybe more like if you can sort of have a sort of an own law for this specific use of open law. Is that what you're getting at, Karin? Like you're having like an international, like some general terms that everybody using this is agreeing on. But that's
not only, Jakob, perhaps also the European whatever safety of intellectual property or something, which might be in every research contract we are doing with universities, for example. Yeah, there's something like this, more general agreed law, which is put somewhere where you can just refer to it. But
I guess the European laws there's already a database from the
are you saying like
from the Commission? So
kind of incorporating by reference, like contracts are just derived as like little pieces and blocks from a sort of master list that sits up top. I think one of the earlier ideas was, general terms and conditions that could probably just be a boilerplate. I think hopefully people on this call are familiar with boilerplate terms, which are non-negotiated, and they're more
I think
like.
This was my question. Perhaps it is pretty not very smart to ask this. I don't know. You are.
No. I struggle to even talk every day. So yeah, no, don't worry.
Don't know if this is.
Let me try to take a picture here. So one thing is OpenLaw provides a library. As you can see here in the screen from I would say Lizzie, from Ross.
Yeah.
So, and you have a reference to a smart contract address. So you can, let me say, you can audit it, you can check it, whether it has been executed, you can see whether it's up and running. So what I see is here that you have not only the contract in the markup language, but you have simple smart contracts or more complex smart contracts which are proven regarding maybe security, because it lives in the Ethereum virtual machines, and you can reuse it and then build your legal contract in the legal world outside of Ethereum, and then wrap it in OpenLaw. So it will be executed with the agreements you are and the liabilities and you agreed on. So this cannot. So Ethereum can't take this from from this part. So the agreement needs to be in both. And then if there are references, as you say, Karin, if there are decisions based on the let's say Amtsgericht or Bundesgericht or any other legal institution who makes decisions, because it's unclear, probably you can say, okay, there is a list or a database where you can build in, but I think it's not the task or the vision of OpenLaw to do this, because at the end, it depends on the country and the regions.
Can I just ask another question? My camera is off because of a low battery.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tobias. Thanks, Ross, for the demo. Karin, if I understand that correctly, what you're asking is basically that somebody use the template structure of OpenLaw and go ahead and codify the existing law so it can be used within the current template structure provided by OpenLaw.
Yeah.
And I think that seems entirely possible if you can get, I don't know, the European Commission and their lawyers agree on doing this. But my personal, I'm afraid they would insist on creating their own language to do that, not use something that exists already.
Would it make sense? Does it, because Jakob, you just mentioned that they already have a database where you can all figure out what's law. Wouldn't it make sense to have there some, for example, hash where you can refer to if you want to say, okay, for this contract, I would like to agree on the European share of intellectual property for whatever, something you figured out or something you made.
I think there isn't actually a very big pain point at that in that area. It's very easy you can just reference to the law of the Federal Republic of Germany, and then everything is included. So that there's not really a big problem in referencing to a certain law. You just name the law, maybe the date when it was published, and then it's pretty clear. So there's not a big pain point to say, and you don't need to reference to a specific section, sentence 2 of a law, because in the end, all of the law is applicable to the contract, and so there's not a big pain point to solve here, I guess.
Yeah. So it's more interesting than having this Lex DAO stuff.
Oh,
Right.
yeah,
That's a whole nother topic, I guess.
certainly.
That's like the arbitration side. That's basically when you have a disagreement after your agreement.
But this is where it gets interesting, doesn't it? Because everything looks fine.
Even more interesting.
As far as
arbitration
you
is a
are
big
agreeing.
part here. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut anybody off, but yeah, what I've noticed just in my sort of approach and just trying to use smart contracts, with my legal agreements is, smart contracts do one thing very well. They operate as programmed, but sometimes the code might be bad, or you might have parties to a smart contract that say, we have a problem, we want out of this agreement. If the funds are on chain, there's not a lot of good ways to get them back, is what I'd say. Our instincts about agreements and how we deal with people, I think, need safety valves, because people don't always do what they're supposed to do. And ideally, if we have a dispute about funds on Ethereum, there is a way to actually settle that dispute rather than going to a judge and saying, can you get me an order to tell this person to sign their MetaMask transaction and give me 1,000 DAI? What I'm trying to do with LexDAO in a lot of ways is create containers for people to do these sort of deals that involve digital assets, but also have this sort of backstop finality of maybe a judge or at least an arbitrator that can sort of render a decision that holds up in court that won't be attacked after the fact, and has the finality, the settlement of, once that decision's rendered, no banks are involved, the money goes where it's supposed to go. I think that's going to be very useful for people who otherwise wouldn't use escrows and wouldn't use smart contracts because they're afraid, and they really like law. They like law as a way to say, I didn't mean that, or this person's actually not who I thought they were, So, but, yeah, it's a whole thing.
I think you're absolutely right that this is completely crucial to the whole industry, or to the development of the industry. But on the other hand, it's trying to replicate at least centuries of legal history, and codify that in structures that are, well, internationally not necessarily very compatible, but getting there. And I think that's very, very difficult to do in the end. I mean, for a lot of trivial contracts, that's probably doable, but for something that is a little bit more complex, the arbitration structure itself is something that is not necessarily codifiable, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we can agree to disagree on some points there, but I definitely agree that it's not easy to just say, like, we recreated arbitration through code. Arbitration and the legal system are very emotional and I think human-based, and people care about traditions. They care about decisions following history. And that sort of consistency allows people to make deals and feel like it's worth it. A code system that takes no account of that history, which is formed largely in response and programmed to how humans have evolved to cooperate. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, there are people like in LexDAO and myself that really think a very legally refined approach is appropriate here, rather than just saying that because we have the ability to do arbitration using code, that doesn't mean that it's going to be good or fair, right? Like, we can have a dictator just say, this person wins, this person gets the 5,000 DAI, and then people might feel really upset about that and not want to use Ethereum because it's associated with, good speeds, but very unfair results. What I think is, cool here, though, is if we take people who are trained in legal theory that understand equity and at least have a mandate to play here that will be respected by judges, if they can sort of fill that role of administration on a smart contract deal, I think the result is at least fair enough to sort of satisfy private arbitration. For a large M&A deal, and even we've seen Aragon, who are creating a digital court, still use old courts for their own disputes. Like, there is a sense of, it's still very nascent and experimental, and it's probably not reasonable to use beyond maybe a 10K dispute. $1 million dispute probably will need to be settled, by a traditional court, because that will have the least sort of disagreement after the fact. Yeah, I think that's my perspective, is that it's naive to think that judges will respect everything that's accomplished by private contracts, especially if it doesn't use language they understand. But if we can represent these things, in language they understand, like a traditional legal agreement, and then just say we have used code to expedite the settlement of disputes, without banks, I think they're probably okay with that.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your explanations.
Of course. Yep.
I'm sorry I have to leave because something has come up, but it was great. Thanks everyone. Thanks Jan for organizing this. As you're always great to be here. Have a great evening and thanks for everything.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
So guys, one question. So according to the agenda, we have Jacob who has prepared something in context of German law. And another open point we have is, Ross, do you have really like companies, startups who are already starting to integrate open law into their system, products, services? Would be great if you can tell us share some insights.
Yeah, sure.
I know from Aave that they have done it with the credit delegation. So yeah.
So quick insights there, and I don't want to feel like a shill, but OpenLaw is involved with a project called OpenLaw, which is trying to use, I guess, Ethereum technology, a DAO, to fund early stage Ethereum startups. We are using OpenLaw to paper those deals, the convertible notes between this DAO, this digital legal structure, and these normal people who just need money in their bank. Like yeah, they are native OpenLaw users, just in terms of we are creating sort of pipelines to get things done for people. One of those pipelines is there's a lot of venture capital interest in Ethereum. There's also a lot of Ethereum OGs that are well endowed. They have a lot of funds, but they want to do it in a fair way. They want to use the technology. They acknowledge there's legal risks. So OpenLaw has sort of evolved and embraced the role of saying we can make this legit. We're gonna provide a way to fund startups. And what is kind of a cool carryover effect is these sort of deals are an example of using OpenLaw technology, and I think they add to the sort of sense of a building library that actually has real use cases and isn't completely speculative. So yeah, that's a modest example. In my own work, I'm a lawyer. I use OpenLaw for my own contracts, with contractors. NDAs are always useful if you do any sort of creative business with somebody. So those are kind of low-hanging fruit use cases for OpenLaw. I use OpenLaw to tokenize personal tokens. Those are kind of re-emerging with excitement, now being called social tokens. But yeah, I think like we're not seeing OpenLaw being used for a Cooley law firm or a large M&A deal quite yet, because I think most lawyers and people who do high value work are still skeptical about a GitHub for lawyers, and they're also skeptical on the effect on their business of embracing that model. There are people, outside of that bubble, ex-lawyers or, people that are already in the blockchain ecosystem that see the ethos of a sort of congregated effort of legal information, using OpenLaw to maybe settle these deals, but more importantly, just like not being weird and and not closely guarding legal information like it's a dragon secret or something. So yeah, there are kind of constructed use cases and users through sort of that network of OpenLaw, the team, and Consensus, which is, I guess, a venture studio on Ethereum. There's a lot of different arms, but for people like me, LexDAO, it's the best way to do e-signatures and also have the ability to do some cool MetaMask stuff like pay somebody. So yeah, I mean, Bright ID is an LLC. They just got funded by the LAO, and we use OpenLaw operating agreements for them. You guys might know Pull Together. That was one of my first clients actually, and we used OpenLaw to paper their operating agreement. That referred to the DAO. They were using Aragon at the time to collect MakerDAO grants to fund the lottery thing they were building. There's other people can name drop, but I feel like that's like less important to just say like, if you build something useful and you promote it, usually you get some good feedback, and so far we've seen that. So yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Are there any bigger visions or milestones the team of OpenLaw would like to approach to? So in the next 6 months or 1 year. So what's the next roadmap milestone?
Oh yeah. So I'll say 2 things here. We have another DAO, but it's focused on so-called non-fungible tokens, which are popularly used to represent rare goods or rare art. This is another use case of OpenLaw. Putting that aside, in terms of technical milestones that are relevant to the OpenLaw library, we have kind of made it very easy to listen to transactions on the Ethereum blockchain, such that we can actually retrieve transaction info from a MetaMask button, press execute, sense of DAI. We can actually pull the transaction hash. We can, if you create a new asset using OpenLaw and our event listening markup, which is still going to be it's working in development. We haven't pushed it to production yet because there's a lot of different, this is more like a technical issue, but yeah, it's hard to push things to production. But in any case, I'm very excited about, that next chapter of the OpenLaw markup, which is reactive to blockchain rather than just instilling value. So like, if I had to explain it better, like the first phase of OpenLaw was like document automation and showing a way to push information such as e-signature or creation of an asset or obligation as a token on chain. Next step is pulling data and events related to those assets that I think reflect a life of a deal. Yeah. A more concrete example, and something I'm working on with LexDAO and escrow smart contracts, is you sign a bill of sale or any other agreement, you escrow the funds, and then OpenLaw will actually tell you what ID your escrow is. So then you can actually click it to say release those funds, or click another button and say it's locked. We need arbitration. I think that's significant. So yeah, OpenLaw will look more like a DApp. The MetaMask buttons that you see, I think, will be understood more as different stages of legal performance in a deal, and that are reflective of different things happening. If somebody actually did the thing, it'll report back and be presented in your e-signed contract. And then, like I said, there's all these pipelines through DAOs that I think naturally lend to OpenLaw, because, like I said, an organization is a set of contracts. DAOs are kind of an evolved sense of that notion, and that are using code to represent those contracts and relationships. So it's very natural to kind of use them as an incubator for OpenLaw users.
Cool. I really like the idea, the next step of the event listener. So from a technical perspective, and also like really executing. So if you have linked contracts, multiple smart contracts, which are, if you look into smart contracts, you have also different third-party libraries which interact with each other. The one contract calls the other contract, so you can represent this on the OpenLaw platform, but with additional metadata from the contract. So you trigger a new contract as soon as something happens, right? And then have a step in between, waiting for additional input. So as soon as it triggers the next step.
Yeah, the full circle.
Yes,
so
the full circle.
Everyone's trying to get, but it's really hard.
Got it. Cool. Community. So, okay, you are going to demonstrate something else right now?
It's a habit. I'm always like doing something. I was going to see if our developed instance could actually show.
I see that you are really love OpenLaw.
I love utility.
So from the community, if you have any other questions for Ross, feel free. Otherwise, we would continue with Jacob's part, and then talk a little bit more about the German legal environment. So Ross, feel free to stay here. Not sure whether Jakob will talk in German or English.
I will do it in English and just run through some slides really quick. Have some thoughts about the boundaries in German law regarding to the contracting or the electronic digital contracts. So I will make it really quickly. I don't want to bore everybody with just legal stuff. So
no, it's important.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, I was hoping that worked.
Yeah, you know.
Things never work when you want them to.
Okay.
I think I have to refresh it to do
Okay.
more stuff.
Should I show
Ross,
my
can
slide?
you? Yeah, Ross,
Yeah, let me get off my screen.
Yes, stop the screen, and then Jack can take over.
Just really quickly.
So you need to stop screen sharing.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to use Zoom right now. It's embarrassing. Oh, God.
So at the upper window, you should see like stop screen share. There's a button, the red button.
Oh, here we go.
Yes.
Oh no, that didn't do it.
No,
How about I'll rejoin the call in a second. I promise. I think that would probably make this easier and less painful for everyone. Sorry. So I'll be back in a second.
Okay.
All right.
Yep. Okay.
All right. Let me know if my screen is on.
Vertragsrechtliche Grundlage.
Ja, genau, richtig.
So, Jakob, ich bin kurz mal weg. Bin in 2 Minuten wieder zurück. Mach einfach weiter.
Du musst den Ross halt wieder reinlassen, ne?
Ja, das stimmt. Einen Moment.
So lange musst du noch kurz aushalten.
Woher weißt du, was ich mache?
Ja. Okay, ganz kurz wirklich. Ich wollte einfach nur ein paar Überlegungen reinwerfen, wie es im Moment nach deutschem Recht aussieht. Klar, 2 übereinstimmende Willenserklärungen haben wir gesehen. Das ist easy, auch per E-Mail, formfrei möglich. Es gibt aber auch Verträge, die notarielle Form oder Schriftform bedürfen.
Okay, Ross ist drin.
Okay, I will switch to English. So you have basically you have text form. That's just a readable declaration, which you can open like an email. Then you have written form, which would be like an actual document where you sign with a pen on paper. That is necessary in German law for certain contracts. And then you also have the electronic form, which is the one that we are talking about here. But the electronic form in German law is one that can actually substitute the written form. So, but for that one, you would need a qualified electronic signature. So if you read electronic form in a German contract, that refers to this law here, section 126a BGB, and that would be one with a qualified electronic signature. So that would not be the one that you can do with OpenLaw. This one is regulated by the EU. I linked the EU regulation here and the German law referring to it. And there you have 3 different kinds of electronic signatures. You have this called the simple electronic signature, which is just defined as electronic data combined with somebody's name or ID, but it's just a name under an email, for example, or you scan a signature, or you do it via OpenLaw. So that would be a simple electronic signature. And then you have also the advanced electronic signature, where you have an additional mechanism for identification. And the even more advanced one is the qualified electronic signature, which is one where you have an identification with a trusted party. And there's actually a list of trusted parties that are qualified to make this electronic signature available. And at the moment, and we're hoping to improve that, most of the time you find these cards with the PIN that are where we have this trusted party identifying you, and then you get the card, and you have your personal PIN, and then it's sure that once you type in that PIN and have your card logged to your computer, and then you have a qualified electronic signature. So this way, it's clear that it's you signing the contract actually. And this is the list of the trusted parties in Germany. They qualified, they went through a certification process, and they qualify to give you the service of being a trusted party for you to have a qualified identification and to be to sign as a qualified electronic signature. But that is only for the cases where you want to actually substitute your electronic signature with a written form. So you would need that for example, for a loan contract with the customer, which is not a business customer. These loan contracts would have to be in written form. And there are some other contracts that have to be in written form. And obviously, the ones that are, very high value contracts, you would probably want them to be in written form. I will show you why later on. This one is a pilot project by the BSI, the German institution for security from the government for how you call that?
Is the internet information? No.
Information security, yeah, right. So they are working on having your actual ID, your German ID card, to use that as a tool for your qualified signature. You can see here how it's set up, but I'm not going to go into this right now because it's already getting late. But they're working on this ID side. And here you get an overview to compare the simple one, the simple electronic signature, the advanced one, and the qualified one. And just one thing to point out: all of these contracts are binding. Yeah, they're all legally binding, but you don't check the identity with the simple one. The identity verification is not certified for the simple and the advanced one, but it's for the qualified one. And you can use all of them in court, but only the qualified signature helps you actually. Then the other party would have to prove that it's actually not been them who signed the contract. With the simple and the advanced electronic signature, you will have to explain to the judge why you're convinced that this party that you sued for whatever claim you have was the party that signed the contract. So if you have just an email, you would have to prove that it's actually been an email that was sent to you from them. And here, I guess you get good help from the OpenLaw tooling, where you can show who was the counterparty, and you would have to explain to the judge why you think that Ethereum address was the address of that person that you're suing. So that would be the thing you would have to do. If you have the qualified one, then the identification issue is solved and it's backed by legislation, and then you have it easier in court if you use that. But obviously, it's a trade-off. You don't want to have all your contracts with a qualified signature, because that would be probably expensive and time consuming, and then you do just your low value contracting, your everyday contracts you do with a simple signature. That you can use OpenLaw for that. And the qualified electronic signature is like the written form by German law. So it's the same as actually signing a document with a pen on paper. And yeah, all of this is regulated EU-wide. So it's all basically the same. There are only different trusted parties in every country. So Germany has a list of trusted third parties that give you the qualified electronic signature, and every other country has their own list. You can look them up. And yeah,
interesting. So, just to a side note, interesting would be to see that I know that OpenLaw provides an integration framework. According to the documentation, you have DocuSign. So if let's say those institutions which are qualified by the government, then you can move this to the third column. Just a side note.
Yeah. And that's already pretty much what I was thinking, just to show you some legal background in Germany, and I think that's where the boundaries are at the moment. But as you already said, Ross, we're covering a huge area of these simple contracts that you're getting much easier to do, and only in the fields of where the written form is required. There we still have some boundaries by law. And obviously, if you go another step further, you have for certain contracts, you have the requirement of a notary, which is a lot here in Germany. Even if you want to establish a limited liability company in Germany, you have to go to the notary. I'm not sure how much they are working with electronic signatures already. I think there are some notaries doing it, but I'm not too aware of it. I haven't seen it myself.
Jakob, just because of interest, if you have something like a contract, for example, for the CO2 footprint, what is it in English?
Carbon footprint.
Carbon footprint. Where would you see the contract space for this? Is it something like there have people to agree on exchanging carbon rights or pollution rights against certificates against? Where would you say which form of law would this be? Is it simple?
I'm not aware of this. It's a very special field, but what you would want to check is if what form the laws there require for the transfer of these certificates. So
yeah, there's UN protocols. There are attempts at the international level to provide a sort of formality for, I guess, establishing carbon credits and then trading them. So that might provide the answer there. It might not be a German law or American law thing, but rather everyone's incorporating UN procedures into their agreement, and that's really the more relevant part. But yeah, anyways, kind of the point Jakob's making though is that the formality of signature is still very local and can be regulated. So regardless of what laws you incorporate into your agreement, if you don't have a way to show judges that it was signed by the people who claimed it was signed by, then you're still in the same position you were in, and there's no improvement. So that's an interesting point, is like the regulation of contract formation. And if there are jurisdictions that are more flexible, I think they will have inherent advantages, because most contracts, especially after the pandemic, are being settled online and through e-signature. And if there is a sense that there is a bias against e-signature as proof of identity in contract formation, if you govern it by German law, then I feel like people will select out of Germany, which might be fine, but
sure.
yeah. So it's I like the competition and jurisdictional arbitrage there. Like that's how we actually get reform through the market. So it might be the case that there's e-signature is rife for fraud, and the German approach is really the most sound for high dollar deals. Like I'm not sure yet. Yeah.
So that's the case. I think with DAOs now, they're going to be hunting for jurisdictions where they can have limited liability without having to go to a notary or to have a certain form for their contract, right? For their
So the preference is for the speed, I guess, and for at least the bias of the entrepreneurs that are using DAOs, like they already kind of reject the notion of regulation of markets, so like they're necessarily going to go to more anarchic jurisdictions or select those in their choice of law and venue. But there's businesses that produce real things. They are construction companies, and I think they'll still be a mainstay of written agreements, because there's more of a sense of we can take this slowly. Like there are contracts where people want to know who they're getting the business with. There's rituals with contract formation that aren't necessarily rooted in efficiency, but are still significant and increase the likelihood of people fulfilling their obligations because they remember it's serious, because they had to do all that stuff. It's almost like signing with blood or something.
Yes.
You know, there will always be a niche of contract formation where people want to sign with blood. Sorry, that's kind of a weird notion. Like people
here,
choose their own flavor of commitment. Yeah.
Here, side note. I mean, we see that we just look at Germany but at the end we do business internationally across borders. So there, I think, will be use cases in the future, especially when you look at the European single market. So there is a roadmap how like business or identities will be like merged or make it possible that individuals can, for example, open a bank account in Belgium or in Poland as a German citizen, for example, and as well when you do business with other countries, that the digital way would be at the end the best way besides written contracts on paper. So I think when we look at this movement, that with some tools like OpenLaw, there are where we can integrate with the IT layer of the European single market. So I'm not sure whether you are used to it, but there are I posted here in the link. So you find use cases where it's possible, or I think in the future, to integrate tools like this. Okay. Jacob, you're finished, right?
I was finished, yeah.
Yeah, you're finished yet. So how is your attention? So we have covered now 2 hours. Any additional thoughts, discussions?
Sure. Were you talking about digital identity and digital citizenship in that last thread? Because I do think, you know, we are seeing people use like Estonia as a way to sort of create a sovereign citizen argument, or saying that, you know, to back it up a bit, you know, the government has a monopoly on identity. You know, if you're born in their jurisdiction, they can kind of claim you or something. So I think there's a migration to opt out and establish citizenship rights, at least access to markets through blockchain identity. If I'm a citizen of Ethereum, nobody on that network can say you can't deal with
as you mentioned, like, you know, those things triggers reforms. And you see that Estonia is ahead like 5 or 6 years, or even further. They started in 2007, their e-government or their movement, and are beyond a lot of companies, and they provide you the to create your business within like 1 day, right? And other countries are following it. It's like, I know from Croatia and other Eastern Europe countries, they follow the path that they at the end they need business, right? They need people be there, paid less tax, but they have probably built a IT system or e-government system which is easier to use and more efficient. So and as Malta as well, the island. And so this is how I observe it in Europe. So and at the end, yeah, digital citizenship, self-sovereign identity, what you mentioned is the movement. And let's see how all this will be meshed and will play together in the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, I think a premise is probably that being able to trade and enter into contracts might be a human right.
Yeah.
And we need to allow people to not be removed from the system by overly licensed jurisdictions or through sanctions. Yeah, I'm kind of making a vague point there, but I do think we are realizing what the internet is offering people in terms of autonomy, and it's quite radical. And people increasingly don't want their professional and philosophical life to be dictated by where they live or their, you know, nationhood.
Yeah,
you know, they might want to find a place to do business that has no nations. You know, not saying that nations will end. There will always be reasons to cooperate and organize locally, and to also have off-chain sanctioning regimes. You know, criminal law. But you know, it's increasingly less relevant to actual commerce and trade and the internet economy. So yeah, a different lane is forming, I would say. And yeah, and maybe it's because competition.
They will have to figure out. They will have to figure out the taxation too, because
there's a lot of different philosophies there. Yeah. There's a come and get it philosophy, which I don't think is going to play out very well. You know, we see Arthur Hayes. You know, like
they will come and they will get.
yeah, or like you're gonna have to like shut down our blockchain, which I don't think we should egg on governments to do that because they can effectively, you know. So yeah, and anyways, like I think there's people who are being a bit more cautious and respectful of sort of the value of government and for legal systems. You know, they are ways for us to securely live together. You know, we need you know, governing bodies that allow us to not have constant vigilante revenge cycles of justice. You know, we need law and order. But law and order for markets and trade, I think, is being distorted by the technical reality of access provided by the internet and now by blockchains to actually send money without the effect of sanctions, which are a whole other topic, you know, that is getting the United States upset about blockchain. But, you know, there's a sense that like black markets have a place in the progression of society and technology. And people like lawyers who are trying to understand it and also figure out how to keep good businesses out of hot water. Like I don't know what to recommend people. You know, like everyone's probably aware that, you know, nations aren't doing awesome right now. You know, like there isn't a great sense of security for the next 20 years, at least, you know, speaking from my perspective. So as a lawyer and as somebody, I think that's tasked with helping people, you know, own what is theirs and, you know, be able to grow their business and their livelihood. There needs to be a bit more toleration for sandboxes. I think some jurisdictions are doing that where they say, we don't understand the technology, but we see our citizens benefit from it. We will provide an exemption for people who identify themselves and create liabilities if they scam. You know, I feel like that's an approach that speaks to the necessity of change, but also isn't saying it's all anarchy. You know, I like that Singapore is doing that. I think, you know, Great Britain as well has a sandbox. We see more progressive attitudes in Wyoming from the American context, where they want crypto businesses to form there. They want crypto businesses to have traditional bank accounts, and they're willing to reshape their legal system to provide more recognition of the real property rights that exist online and in digital tokens and other assets. You know, there was an attitude of government that none of this stuff was worth anything, that it was all valueless. Now there is a recognition of value. So now that the trend is now to regulate it and say, you know, there is market behavior here. A lot of that market behavior is scamming, you know, clearly, you know, so like there needs to be a sort of way to still protect people, and the law is a tool to do that. So kind of what I see, you know, with people in my field is an encouragement to entrepreneurs to take responsibility if they create experimental financial products on Ethereum or otherwise. And part of that responsibility is naming themselves, you know, not just being completely anonymous, not making irresponsible comments and inviting people to FOMO. I think that has been pretty good so far to show self-regulation, because a lot of these assets can, you know, be considered equity or investment contracts, but they're also sort of access rights to work. Some people are building livelihoods around trading, you know, digital assets. They also are optimistic on livelihoods that are built around DAO membership, which, you know, it's not clear if people are doing work or if they're passive owners. A lot of that is still being determined. You know, what is the value of voting in a DAO? Is that actually a true ownership and control, such that we don't need the sort of protections of securities regimes because people are necessarily informed if they control something. So yeah, there's kind of that sense of like control is naturally going to become more modular, more diffuse, and legal regimes have less to do in preventing unfair harms being wrought by the powerful and the well-connected if everything's actually above board and, you know, lives on the internet and everyone can inspect it, like the Ethereum blockchain. And they can also see when people commit fraud, and they can create their own sort of social sanctions after the fact. I think we do see social sanctions in the blockchain space, and that has been pretty encouraging. With Arthur Hayes, I don't think anyone's really playing a violin over his demise. People aren't, or I should say, people are playing a violin, but like people don't really care about some of these actors in the space who are doing more harm than good just by enticing retail to go leverage 100x on Bitcoin. Like that is not what this technology is about. So I don't know. Like it's a fight. So very difficult.
Yeah, interesting thoughts. Yeah. Well, I think social sanctions are something that can become problematic, right? So it can become this mob mentality, or that's also what law is for, to kind of not have you exposed to social sanctions, but
that's a really good point. I mean, we've seen on the
sanctions.
internet. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah. There are mobs on the internet that try to cancel people, that rush to conclusions that in a more deliberate legal analysis would, maybe hit here, the crowd always goes here. But what I think is cool, if you have a way to communicate about the market and to record transactions like Ethereum and maybe what we see on Twitter, people who engage in mob justice are still accountable. In traditional mobs, you have people with pitchforks and they delight and cause violence and harm because they're not really culpable. They're part of this diffuse mob, and they can just fade back into the background and say, I wasn't there, I wasn't part of the mob. There are
I think there's a thin line, because we have we don't have maybe the sufficient laws yet for the situations that we have on Ethereum. So these social sanctions, as you call them, they're trying to fill a void there, or are going to lead to new laws, and have regulators think about how to actually phrase the new laws in that sense. But it can turn over into mob mentality, or I think it should always lead to, at the end, it should lead to a sort of written law that has some sort of oh, no, I'm missing a word, like a backing, like by a state, or and it should be like just a social, or by a community community court
approach.
Something comes up to my mind. Please have a look at Giddens, who's a social researcher from US, I think. He wrote something about how rules evolve in communities. Would be interesting to have a look in. It's 20 years ago that I really wrote about, read and wrote myself about this, but I think you would find some very smart thoughts about how the rules should evolve. And because be careful if you do something or sanction someone, it's all, you always have this minority thing in, and
come back.
This is what Jacob is referring to, I think. And I, to my knowledge, it's such a long time ago. I'm sorry for this, but I think you will find some very interesting sentences in Giddens' social research stuff. He worked it out. I think it was smart, when I remember right.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, that's helpful. One thing I might note in terms of how the law adapts and changes is probably through like moral outrage, and crowd mobs are a good, I think, canary in the coal mine for the legal system to say, this is making people really passionate and unpredictable. We don't like that. Passionate and unpredictable can allow us to move forward, but we can't always exist in that state, or else it's chaos. So I do see, when people gang up on somebody, they're really trying to enunciate an internal sense of right and wrong, of justice, that ideally the legal system already covers, but there's areas where the legal system isn't really adequate. Like I guess like we are seeing, with James McAfee, who got sanctioned yesterday, that you can't promote something and not tell people